To our Provo Municipal Council meeting. This is also a meeting of the Provo City Stormwater Service District and the Redevelopment Agency Governing Board. It is Tuesday, May 17th, 2022, 5:33 p.m. Members of the public can view council meetings on YouTube or Facebook, or they may attend in person in the council chambers at the Provo City Center. I remind participants to mute their microphone when not speaking to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear. My name is George Handley. I'm Vice Chair. We excuse Travis Hoban, our Chair, who is unable to attend today, but I'm joined on the stand by fellow councilors Shipley, Ellsworth, Whipple, and McKay. And we are also joined by Mayor Kafusi, Wayne Parker, Chief Administrative Officer, and John Magnus, our Interim Executive Director. I saw Brian Jones. He might be joining us on the dais shortly. We will begin with an opening prayer by Kelsey Zarbach, after which we will have the Pledge of Allegiance led by Councilor Dave Shipley.
Father in heaven, we are grateful to be gathered here tonight. We're especially grateful that we live in a community with such capable citizens and leaders, and we pray that that will guide them, especially the council tonight as they make decisions. We are grateful for this city and for the blessings we enjoy here, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
All rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. As indicated on the screen, a required public hearing will be held for certain agenda items prior to council action. After each such item has been presented, time to comment will be provided for all those who wish to speak. For items that do not require a public hearing, public comment will still be taken following the presentation of the item, but will be limited to 10 minutes. At this time, up to 15 minutes have been set aside for an open public comment period, which is intended to allow comments on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Persons who speak during this time to an item that is on the agenda will not normally be afforded a second opportunity to speak during the comment period specific to that item. During any public comment period, each speaker will generally be limited to 2 minutes. Due to noticing requirements, no formal action will be taken in this meeting on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Those with comments are invited to approach the podium. Those participating on Zoom will need to use the raise hand function to indicate they wish to comment. The chair may choose to alternate between in-person and online commenters. Please begin your comments by stating your name and city of residence, and you will have 2 minutes to speak. To assist the city recorder with the minutes, we ask those commenting in person to print your name on a slip of paper provided at the back of the room and place it in the container near the podium. Online commenters should spell their names out before commenting. All right, so we invite anyone who would like to offer comment during the public comment period, as I just described. Please let us know. I do not see anybody online, no one here in the chamber coming forward, so we'll move on to our action agenda. We have an implied motion on a resolution approving a substantial amendment to the program year 2019 annual action plan, reprogramming CDBG-CV funds for COVID-19 public health response. This was presented by Melissa McNally, Provo City Planner. Thank you, Melissa, for being here.
Good evening, Council and Mayor and Mr. Parker. So about a month ago, Dan Gonzalez brought pretty much the same presentation to you. And so the substantial amendment is just reprogramming some funding that we got from HUD for coronavirus recovery efforts. And it's being reprogrammed to just a couple other projects for COVID funding. So that's that as far as the COVID funding. If you guys have questions, I'll take them later. But just to kind of give you an overview, sorry, I kind of skipped this step. Apologies. Just to kind of give you an overview on the programming. So every year, Provo City gets a little over $1 million in community development block grant funding, and then a little over $1 million in the home program. And so part of the process of that is we have nonprofits who come and make presentations to us on different things to do with that funding to help our community. So we have committees for each of the programs who listen to the presentations, and then they make funding recommendations based on what we think we're going to get from the federal government for the award year and kind of what's needed most in the community. And then we bring those final funding recommendations to you, the council, who then it's up to you to approve or deny the funding. And so that's your role, and that's what we're doing tonight. So we have our COVID funding that's it's not additional. We're just moving it around to be used because it wasn't being used where it was. So we're hoping it will get used up where we're moving it to. Do you want to go to the next slide? And I don't know. So is this a separate thing, Brian? Do we need to sorry, because there's the substantial amendment, and then the second part is for the home and CDBG. Do I need to do those separately?
So the two.
But I've read those two items together.
Yeah, I mean, you could read them in and talk about them both at the same time. They just need to be, the two resolutions need to be voted on separately.
Okay.
The one resolution is for the reprogramming for COVID, and the other resolution is for the year 3 annual action plan.
Okay. Do I need to read those resolutions too?
No.
Okay.
No.
But why don't I just read in item number 2? So we'll discuss both simultaneously, and then we'll do separate votes. The second one is a resolution approving the year 3 annual action plan of the 2020 to 2024 5-year consolidated plan.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So the funding that we have this year, again, this is just kind of regurgitating stuff that Mr. Gonzalez brought to you last month. So with our CDBG funding, we work in tandem with Utah County and Orem City. It's the Mountain Land Association of Governments. So they do the funding for Lehigh and for Utah County. So we work with them. This is something that HUD has wanted us to do. So we collaborate so that we can bring the most benefit to our nonprofits. So they're then not making separate presentations to all the entities. They can come to one place, and we can give them the maximum amount of funding between all of the entities. So that's what we do with a portion of our community development block grant. With the other portion, we use that for different infrastructure needs within the city. And it is specific to be used in low to moderate income neighborhoods within Provo City. So we can use it for whatever infrastructure things that we need, that the city needs most, like parks or sewer or sidewalk, that kind of thing. And then we have our home funding. Do you want to go to the next? I'm not really following the slides. So, and again, if you guys have questions, I'm happy to answer those as we're going or at the end, whenever. So then our home funding is, it's part of a formula grant, and HUD decided to award Provo City that, and I'm not sure when that happened. It was several years ago. So we're kind of like the keeper of that grant, and we work with all of Utah County. So a portion of that grant stays within Provo for Provo City programs. The rest of the grant we use within the county, and it's all to provide low and moderate income housing opportunities. So like I said, we're kind of like the gatekeeper for that. So you'll see a lot of that funding will go out into the county. And that's just because we've been designated as the lead on that. It's not that we're giving, it's come up in the past. That's why I bring it up. It's come up with past councils. They're worried that we're giving our Provo money away. We're not. We're keeping our Provo money. So, and so that is what I'm bringing to you tonight. I think Mr. Gonzalez has sent you all the funding recommendations. And if you have any questions on any of that, I'm happy to answer those, or questions about anything. I'm happy to answer.
Counselor Shipley.
Just a quick question. So I see a division, pretty substantial amounts going to an infrastructure project. And I just wonder if there's guidelines, federal guidelines on what percentage of these grants can actually go to infrastructure versus the nonprofits, or I just see a lot of cities just saying, oh, we're going to repurpose all this to go to infrastructure because we have so many needs. Right. But is there a breakdown that they predetermine? There
is, and it's up to the council, and past council, a few years, maybe it was 5 years ago or so, decided to do. So HUD says that you can allocate up to 15% of your CDBG grant to go towards the nonprofits and the social service programs that they run. So a council several years ago voted to contribute the full 15% that we're allowed to allocate to those social service programs. So that's up to, and that percentage can go up or down, no more than 15%, but it's up to council's discretion to reduce that or leave it at the 15%.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is, I can't remember whenever I've seen the request at a certain amount and then the amount that was given.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a substantial difference. Some were 100%, some were like 25%. I just don't have a sense of whether or not in those cases where they didn't get everything they were asking for, whether they felt like that helped at all. You know what I mean? Sometimes if they're given 25% of the money they asked for, it does nothing, and they, are as hobbled as they were before because they can't cover the difference. So that's just been kind of a general anxiety that I've had as I look at these requests. Are these situations where the entities who are receiving, a portion of what they asked for are still able to do
that's a great
most of what they were hoping, or is it, or do they feel like that's just not well served?
So I wasn't involved in this round of funding or any of that, but I know that in the past they have asked what, if you're not able to get the maximum amount, what is the minimum that you would need to keep operating? Okay. So I'm assuming, and this is just an assumption, that is still something that is in the application packet, because that is important to know. We don't want our nonprofits going out of business. Was there one in particular, Mr. Henry?
I didn't pull it up. Sorry.
Do you?
Sure. Well, I think the most important thing for me is it all the way at the end. It's where they have the graphs or the tables, right? That's actually reassuring to me, as long as that's the practice.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can't, when I look at the sheet, I can't know any of that information. So, knowing a little bit more context that you've given us about committees reviewing these, and if that's the standard practice, that's helpful. I think maybe in the future, if the recommendation is substantially lower than the request, I don't know if it would be helpful to. I don't want to burden anybody with undue work. I'm just a little bit of context, like, this was the minimum they asked for. They felt like they could still use that. That's all I'm worried about. I'm just worried about somebody saying $10,000 is just not going to help us.
Right.
We needed the 25.
I agree. yeah, I think that would be very beneficial for council.
I've just been part of nonprofit work and I know how
It is hard.
every
They
penny
struggle.
matters. And so in some ways, every penny helps,
It
but
does.
in other cases it doesn't because there may be a specific project that they
Mhm.
can't do because they don't have the full funding.
Right. And I think another one of the things that is looked for, and this would also be helpful information for you, I think for you to have, is to see what they're intending to do with that funding. Because sometimes that also determines whether they get fully funded or just partially. Or so in the future, yes, I think that's something that you should have access to.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I'll call for public comment on this item. Anyone from the public who would care to make a comment on either item number 1 or number 2? We do have someone online. If you desire to speak, you'll have to raise your hand virtually. Okay. All right, seeing no public comment, I'll bring it back for discussion on the council. Any discussion of this item? So this is the second of 2 hearings. So tonight, we do need to ratify both. Is that correct? All right. Okay, no further.
Lots of head nodding, which for the record is a yes. So.
Yes, okay, the answer to that question was yes. There does not appear to be any conversation, so I'll do 2 separate roll calls on the 2 items. So we'll start first with the resolution approving a substantial amendment. We'll start with Councilor Ellsworth.
Yes.
Councilor Fillmore.
Yes.
Councilor Whipple.
Yes.
Councilor Shipley.
Yes.
Councilor McKay.
Yes.
Travis Hoban is excused and I, Vice Chair Handley, will vote yes. So that was 6 in favor, none opposed, and 1 excused. So for the second implied motion on the resolution approving the year 3 annual action plan, we'll begin with Councilor Fillmore.
Yes.
Councilor Whipple.
Yes.
Councilor Shipley.
Yes.
Councilor McKay.
Yes.
Chair Hoban is absent. Vice Chair Handley, I will vote yes. Councilor Ellsworth.
Yes.
All right, that also is unanimous, 6 in favor, none opposed, with 1 excused. All
Thanks,
right,
Melissa. You always do a great job.
We'll move on to item number 3, an implied motion on a resolution tentatively adopting the tentative budget for Provo City Corporation for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022 and ending June 30th, 2023. This will be presented by Kelsey Zarbuck. And Kelsey, I don't remember what your title is.
Budget officer.
Budget officer, thank you.
Yes, we're here tonight because state code requires the governing body for cities in the state of Utah to adopt or tentatively adopt a tentative budget in a regular council meeting on or before the last meeting in May. So here we are. This is by no means the final budget adoption. We still have 2 public hearings in June where we'll actually have a lot of public comment on it. We can go through reconciliations between tentative budget and final adopted budget numbers and so on. And so this is just basically filling a state code requirement and giving us that starting point for where to base our budget on for the fiscal year 23 fiscal year. So this first resolution is for the city budget for Provo City. The amount for the tentative budget is $384,034,697. Any questions?
Or Ellsworth.
Yeah, the resolution references Exhibit A. Was that sent to our email? It's not published online.
It's basically the tentative budget that is online on the city's website. And I apologize for not like linking that with the resolution. But it's what was presented last week in this
Has it
meeting.
been updated since last week?
It has not been updated online. I'm aware, and John Magnus has relayed a few suggested changes from the council, and those are going to be presented starting at the June 7th meeting. I think we'll start to show you a reconciliation between the tentative budget that we presented last week and then what will eventually become the final version of the budget.
The
modifications that we have discussed have not been.
if you have it down.
No, we're keeping a running list of all the changes that are being made. And that will be presented next week when we do start the formal, not next week, but the next hearing, we start the formal adoption of the budget. This is just a working draft of the budget that we're adopting or tentatively adopting tonight.
Okay. I had thought that Mr. Shipley, with the ARPA committee, we were making amendments to the tentative budget. But that's post-adoption of the tentative budget, or that's post-tentative adoption of the tentative budget?
I'm not aware of the council passing any motions to make changes to the tentative budget, which is what would be required to make changes to it. So it's,
We need to make a motion before we tentatively pass the tentative budget?
well, again, you're not tentatively passing it, you're tentatively adopting it, which basically means you are receiving it and declaring it to be received.
Okay.
All you're really doing is saying to the public, this is now the budget document that we will be reviewing in the next two public hearings prior to adopting it. If you want to make changes to it before you tentatively adopt it, that would require a motion.
Okay. Thank you.
And I just, so you're aware, we have received the list, we have received changes that we are incorporating into the budget that will be presented on the 7th. So, yes.
So meaning that it probably is semantics if we voted on making some changes, if they're already in the works and would be presented next week. It sounds to me like it doesn't really matter.
Right. I mean, just for some historical context, up until, I don't know, Wayne, if you remember the detail, probably 4 years ago, the council didn't even have this, historically never even had this second meeting. First meeting of May, they got the tentative budget and they just immediately tentatively adopted it the second they received it. Because all you're really doing is saying the mayor's budget has been received and we're now going to consider it. It's now you're saying this is now the official document that we're going to consider. So again, you can make changes to it before tentatively adopting it, but it's not necessary because you can just make those changes afterwards. Staff can, of course, also adopt changes that they're aware of, proactively if they want to, but again, that's not required.
So, just as a point of clarification on the ARPA programming, that's been part of what you've received that won't be part of the proposed budget coming in June.
So yeah, it's not in the current version, the tentative budget online right now, but by the June 21st, we're going to have several changes. And we've actually received changes just from departments like, oh, I noticed that this wasn't included in the tentative budget. And we're just keeping a running list of reconciliations. So that way we'll be able to say, this is what is different from the tentative budget compared to the adopted or like the final version of the budget. And that way it kind of helps us with version control. So we're not just like trying to stick in changes like every single time we present to you. But we are keeping track of that and making the changes as we go just in our spreadsheets that will eventually get incorporated into another PDF file that will be the final budget. So anyway, we're just trying to do it methodically so we don't miss anything ultimately.
All right. Thank you. So if there are no other questions for Kelsey Zarbach, then we'll open this up for public comment. Any comment from the public? All right, seeing no comment from the public, I'll bring it back to the council for any discussion. Seeing no discussion, I'll call for a vote. Oh, yes.
So it sounds like this is really a moot point, and maybe this is just an off-topic issue, I guess, now, since we're just saying we've received it. We're not actually saying that we agree to anything in it. But that seems like a weird exercise to me. So in the future, I think like if we're going to do it the way we're saying we're going to do it now, we might as well just get it and pass the very first time and not even worry about having 2 weeks to think about it and read through it. I actually like the idea that we have a few weeks to think about it, read through it, and actually update the tentative budget just for the night that we pass it, so that there's a clear indication before we get the first week of the actual budget review, that things have adjusted. So maybe for this meeting and for future reference, we just have that list before we come into tonight's meeting, so we kind of know what might be updated. But to that point, there was some programming within ARPA that we discussed as a committee to remove from the budget. We can always appropriate it back to the budget at some point as a council, and so that's our intent.
I think that's a good point, and I would point out that there is one practical impact of tentatively adopting the tentative budget, which is that if you decide to go to truth and taxation, the tentatively adopted tentative budget is the budget from July 1st until you actually pass a final budget in August. Now, having said that, I'm not aware of any reason under state law that between now and the end of May, you couldn't make changes to the tentative budget. So let's say you want to go to truth and taxation. I think that in the second meeting of May, you could make a motion to start the truth and taxation process, and you could pass a resolution to modify the tentatively adopted tentative budget for the purposes of having those changes be effective from July 1st until the final budget is adopted. If that makes sense.
Are you talking about next year? Because this is the second meeting in May, right? So we would need to,
I was talking about the second meeting in June.
second meeting in June.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I'm saying, because your deadline for deciding to either adopt the final budget or go to truth and taxation is the end of June.
Okay.
So I'm saying in that last meeting, let's say there was something, a lot of times there's not a practical impact because those numbers are not going to, changes you make aren't really going to have an impact until next March or something like that, right? But if you needed to, you could make changes to, and you wanted to go to truth and taxation, you could make that decision in the second meeting in June and modify the tentative budget for the 2 months that it's going to be the real budget, if that makes,
Okay.
anyway.
And to clarify, Mr. Shipley, you were saying that you'd rather have the tentative budget draft given to us earlier and then skip the second hearing and just adopt it on the first hearing?
I heard the other.
Yeah, I guess my thought is the other way around. So if we're going to do it in a way that it's more of a rubber stamp, let's just review it the first part of May, pass it because it doesn't matter, and have time to review for the real budget. If we're going to use this as a process of consultation and trying to update the tentative budget, then let's update it and make sure that, by the time we get to this meeting, that we can have those changes updated in the tentative budget. So I just think this year, I didn't know which way it was. We had gotten I had been communicated to that we could update the tentative budget, but I agree that if we're just piecemealing, from departments and from the council along the way, that would get difficult too. So I guess I'd be open to the suggestion for next year on which way it should go. But, as long as we know and then have that time to still address it, I think we're fine either way. For purposes of tonight, I think we're doing on the second meeting what we should have done just last time. Just pass the tentative budget, not worry about it, and do the work for the real budget.
Okay.
I tentatively agree.
Thank you.
Sorry, I couldn't resist.
Thanks, Travis.
Yeah, right. All right. Any other discussion on this item? Councilor Whipple.
So as I understand it, the only reason not to pass the tentative budget without doing a motion to modify it right now is if we think we are going to go into truth and taxation and we don't want to have to modify it later.
No, I don't think that's the only reason not to. In fact, I don't even, like I said, historically, the council has done it a couple of different ways. For the first several years that I was council attorney, they met the first meeting. They did exactly what Mr. Shipley was describing a few minutes ago, they would meet the first meeting in May, which is when the statute says you're supposed to receive the mayor's budget. And they would just immediately tentatively adopt it. And then they would spend 3 meetings coming up with the final budget, right? And that's one way to do it. And then 4 or 5 years ago, we looked at one of the counselors was looking at the state statute about tentatively adopting the tentative budget and noticed that it says something about reviewing and considering. And and a couple of the counselors said, we don't really feel like just rubber stamping it is reviewing and considering. So let's turn it into a 2-meeting process. And when they did that, they did start. So the idea was, if you get at the beginning of May and there is something in there that you already know you're going to change, and you think, before we tell the public to start giving us public comment on this budget, let's make that change so they're not giving us comments on something that we're going to change anyway, then you could make those changes. And so you're certainly able to make those changes now. The logistical difficulty is that staff can't make those changes between the 2 meetings based on individual counselors saying that they think something ought to be changed. It needs to be done by motion in this meeting. So if you have a list of things that you want changed right now before the public is notified that this is the budget that they should review, you can do that right now. And there's several reasons why you should do it right now, but you need to have with specificity exactly what it is that you're going to move to change. Does that help?
That does. And what I was thinking too was what you're saying about with the truth and taxation, that if we pass it as it is, then this becomes kind of the default running budget.
Yes, whatever you pass tonight, if you do truth and taxation, becomes the default running budget for July and August, subject to change. Just because it becomes the default doesn't mean that you can't change it. And state law actually allows you to, actually gives you a choice. You can either choose to adopt, you can either choose to operate on the tentatively adopted tentative budget for July and August, or you can actually choose to operate for July and August based on last year's approved budget. So you can make that choice by resolution when you decide to go to truth and taxation.
And that's the council decision, not the administration decision.
Correct. Yeah.
And we have 4 to 6 weeks to do that, to make any changes that we feel might.
Right. Second meeting in, well, the end of June. You have all the way till the end of the month, so you could do it by, you could have a special meeting, although you have to adopt the tax rate by the 22nd. I think you have to adopt the tax. Well, I guess if you're having truth and taxation, you don't need to adopt the tax rate. Anyway,
Okay.
It used to be you had to do the whole thing by the 22nd. Now it's actually June 30th if you want to hold a special meeting.
Okay. Clear as mud.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. As always, Brian helps us through the murky bureaucracy of policy. We appreciate it. Okay. Any other comments? If not, I'll call for a vote on the implied motion. I'll begin with Councillor Whipple. We're rotating through the list so that everyone gets an equal chance to be at the beginning.
I'll vote yes.
Councillor Shipley,
Yes.
Councillor McKay,
Yes.
Chair Hoban is excused. I, Vice Chair Handley, will vote yes. Councillor Ellsworth,
Yes.
Councillor Fillmore,
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
all right.
Hold on, Jay, I just had to vote. I muted and I called for my vote.
Okay. We have 6 in favor, none opposed, and Chair Hoban is excused. All right, so if there is no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo Municipal Council meeting and convene as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo by unanimous consent. Councilors, you will want to turn on your mic and speak up if you object.
Excellent. Good evening and welcome to the Redevelopment Agency Governing Board. We will now consider item number 4, a resolution tentatively adopting a tentative budget for the Redevelopment Agency of Provo City Corporation for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022. If there are any members of the public online who would like to comment, please be prepared to do so. This will be presented by Kelsey Zarbach. Excellent.
This is basically the same story. So we have the redevelopment agency budget, which was presented in the May 3rd council meeting, tentative budget. The amount is $1,203,488 and is still subject to 2 public hearings on June 7th and then again on June 21st. Any questions?
Are there any questions from the board? All right, thank you. Seeing none, we will open this this item for public comment. Is there anyone in the room who would like to comment? Anyone online?
No.
All right, well, a motion is needed to approve the resolution.
I'll move that we tentatively adopt the tentative budget.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Councilor Whipple. All right, we will, if there is no, is there any discussion on the motion? I'm assuming there's no discussion on the motion. All right, we will call for a vote. Councilor McKay, or I'm sorry, Board Member McKay.
Yes.
Board Member Shipley.
Yes.
Board Member Fillmore.
Yes.
Board Member Handley.
Yes.
Board Member Hoban is excused. Vice Chair Whipple.
Yes.
And I, Chair Ellsworth, vote yes. So that is a 6 board members voting in favor and 1 excused. All right, if there is no objection, we will now adjourn the Redevelopment Agency of Provo and convene as the Provo City Stormwater Service District by unanimous consent. If there is any board member that objects, please speak up now. All right, there are no objections.
All right, we'll go back now as Provo City Stormwater Service District to item number 5 on our action agenda, resolution tentatively adopting a tentative budget for the Provo City Stormwater Service District for the fiscal year beginning July 1st, 2022 and ending June 30th, 2023. If any members of the public would like to make a comment on this item, they're encouraged to call in or sign in now. This will also be presented by Kelsey.
So this resolution would tentatively adopt the proposed stormwater service district budget for fiscal year 23. The amount is $6,263,228. And again, we'll have 2 more public hearings for the budget on June 7th and June 21st.
Thank you. All right, any comment from the public on this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board for discussion. Any discussion of this item? Councilor Ellsworth.
I think we covered this earlier, but it would be helpful if the exhibits are part of the council packet in the subsequent meetings.
Yeah. Okay, I will need a motion to approve the resolution.
I move that the Stormwater Service District Board, are we a board?
We are.
Okay. Board tentatively adopt the tentative budget for the Provo City Stormwater Service District.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Councilor Shipley seconds. Councilor Ellsworth made the motion. I'll call for a vote on the motion. Board Member Ellsworth.
Yes.
Board Member Whipple.
Yes.
Councilor Hoban is absent. Board Member Handley, I will vote yes. Board Member Fillmore.
Yes.
Board Member Shipley.
Yes.
And Board Member McKay.
Yes.
That is 6 in favor, none opposed, and Councilor Hoban excused. So if there is no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo City Stormwater Service District by unanimous consent. And I believe that ends our evening.
To the lake.
Good evening, everyone.